And Fraser, as we've been saying, Donald Trump said he was giving Iran 2 weeks to decide. He then carried out these attacks just days later. What else do we know about how that decision to act so quickly was made?
Alison, I think this is actually one of the most misreported things from the last couple of days. If you go back and check the tapes, Donald Trump didn't say he was giving them 2 weeks. He said, I'll make a decision within 2 weeks. And that is a key difference. Donald Trump did not say this was going to happen in 2 weeks' time. It was within 2 weeks. And I will say, if you can ask our boss once we get off air, I had a gut feeling that this was going to happen this evening because there have been small breadcrumbs dropped throughout the course of the week or so, which obviously these kind of events, hindsight is 2020, but there were small breadcrumbs that led throughout the week that got us here. Now, to break a couple of those down, on the more diplomatic side, we're now learning more, thanks to reporting from Axios and my colleague Barak Ravid, about the diplomatic behind the scenes here. That, combined with a couple of sources that I've spoken to, have kind of put the picture into a bit more focus. So we know that last Monday, Donald Trump was at the G7, and remember, he left rather abruptly. There may now be a couple of reasons for that. Of course, we heard at one point from Macron that it was because he was trying to broker a ceasefire with Iran. Donald Trump pushed back against that. But we are now learning from Axios that there was actually a phone call placed to Donald Trump while he was at the G7 from Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, who said that he was trying to organize some back-channel meetings with Iranian leadership and the US. Now, these talks from the Iranian side had to get signed off from the Supreme Leader himself, who had gone into hiding into a bunker and was only communicating through a trusted aide. So therefore, these talks never officially got signed off on. But the US was taking these talks so seriously that Donald Trump even said that he would fly to Istanbul himself if he had to go to these talks. But it was much more likely that J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff, the special envoy for the Middle East, was going to be the person that would have been sent to these talks to have with the senior Iranian leadership, including potentially the foreign minister and also the president. Ultimately, though, it transpired that the Iranians could not, like I said, get that signed off by the supreme leader. So those talks fell through. We then fell down to Friday, and I was working some sources here in D.C., European sources as well, to see what the kind of stakes of this meeting were that the EU leaders were having with the Iranians in Geneva. Because, of course, as we heard, it came out that the Iranians ultimately were not really looking to deal with the Europeans, that they only wanted to deal with the Americans. But the Europeans had been told by the Americans. Dave Lammy, the foreign secretary for the United Kingdom, was here at the White House speaking to Marco Rubio the day before those talks took place. And we now know that in that meeting, Marco Rubio basically briefed Lammy on what he expected to come out of this meeting and signs to look for. And I think it's fair to say that from discussions that I'm having off the record with sources, that the kind of vibe was that the Americans wanted to get a sense from the Iranians through the Europeans where these negotiations stood and whether there was a real chance of something actually happening here as a negotiation or not. And ultimately, those talks did not produce as much as the Americans were looking for. And reading between the lines, it appears to me that that was the kind of tipping point in Donald Trump's head that then saw this strike get greenlit. We heard, of course, reporting earlier in the week that Donald Trump had already approved these attack plans on Tuesday, but had just not given the final authorization. And it appears that that final authorization came early on Saturday or overnight on Friday, with Donald Trump, of course, coming back early from his weekend in Bedminster, New Jersey, to come back to the White House to go straight into the Situation Room at 6 p.m. local time, which again, in hindsight, was another breadcrumb. So that was another thing that kind of tipped me off that something was awry. So the 2-week deadline that he gave almost kind of was an interesting change, but of course a lot of things became very dynamic and moved very quickly, and it appears that the situation appeared such that Donald Trump decided now was the time to go for this strike, and then of course we saw the B-2 bombers moving in different locations, the movement of refueling planes across Europe from Ramstein Air Force Base and elsewhere to help these B-52s on their continuous flight path. And we're now hearing from a source who's spoken to the New York Times that these B-52s flew for 31 hours straight, which is, regardless of which side of a conflict anybody is on, that's an incredible achievement of airmanship for a two-person crew to fly 31 hours uninterrupted. And so this now has become a significant feat militarily for the United States, but politically it's leaving them in a very precarious situation, and the future of the Middle East could potentially now ride on how Iran responds to this bombing.